for this session. We had over, how many was it, Alejandra? Over 100 people from the Africa region were signing, Africa and Europe with the Africa time zone region signing up for this session. So obviously a lot of interest in private sector. So we'll give it a minute or two to see if others would like to join. But in the meantime, please, in the chat, you can put your name, which country you're calling us from, and if you're working for a FOLUR program, which program is that? Thank you, Alejandra, for noting that in the chat. Some familiar names are joining us. Hi, Ronald. Nice to see you with us. And if you can put your camera on while we are in plenary, it'd be great to say hello. And if you can rename yourself using the 3 little dots to put your organization next to your name, then we can see who we have calling in as well. Thank you for adding that. I know that internet is sometimes difficult, so it isn't easy to have the camera on, so I do appreciate that as well. Just a quick note before we start. I think a couple of you had invited as well note taker application, an AI app. I'm afraid we cannot use that because I will be sharing some information that is a bit confidential, names of companies, etc. So we don't want that to be accessible by AI. If you're working with the private sector, I think that's something for you to think about as AI is used more and more, and you are working with especially multinational companies who maybe have sensitive information they are sharing with you. It is advisable to have that discussion with your partners as to what you can and can't share. So I'm afraid for this meeting, we are not accepting note takers. A lot of people joining in, so welcome everyone to this short session, 1 hour, just under an hour now, to talk about how to engage the private sector. Just a quick introduction. My name is Christina Archer. I'm supporting the UNDP food systems team with private sector engagement and have been working with the FOLUR programs for a number of years now. This is one of our last sessions under the GEF7 FOLUR series, where as part of the work with the global platform, we are offering these sessions for FOLUR teams on how to deepen your engagement with the private sector. We know all of you already are working with the private sector. It is a key component of all of the FOLUR programs. Private sector is a key stakeholder that you will be working with and probably already have worked with. So we're not here today to tell you how to work with the private sector, more to help give you some tools and share some thoughts about how to deepen that, how to be more strategic in how and who you work with, and give you some tools that might be useful for you and your partners to use in doing that. Please feel free to share any thoughts or questions in the chat. As I mentioned at the start, we know you all already have got some really good work you're doing with the private sector. So if you'd like to share some good examples or lessons learned or anything useful for colleagues on the call, please do so. So it is going to be a chance for you to also share that. I think without further ado, maybe we'll start. I will just share my screen and just make sure you can all see my screen. Yeah. Alejandra? Yep, great. So today we're going to go through a few slides, as I said, just to share some ideas and tools that we've used with other FOLUR programs to help teams reflect and deepen their work with the private sector. We also have a short intervention, a little case study from the FOLUR Ethiopia team, who had a workshop using the tools that we're presenting today last year, with just their reflections on how it went and sharing some examples. We're not sure if they will be able to join in person, so we maybe have to share the recording from yesterday. So it is some presentation on slides and then a short case study from Ethiopia. Don't want to do that. You're all working on collaboration spaces. FOLUR is all about collaboration at a landscape level with different stakeholders in order to achieve in each country sort of different objectives, but around food, land use, and restoration of different programs. So you've all already have engaged, depending on your program, depending on your objectives, government authorities at different levels, maybe at national, maybe only at local and regional, a variety of civil society organizations as well as development partners. Today, we're only going to talk about the private sector actors. So how can you expand your identification of who are the private sector actors you can and should work with, and bringing in new ones possibly that you won't have identified. The process of stakeholder mapping and stakeholder engagement is very familiar maybe to many of you, so the tools will be the same, but we're only focusing today on who could the private sector be. And what I've heard over the last few years with many teams I've worked with is we think private sector and we think companies. We work in coffee, we think of Nestle. And the objective is to go beyond who you maybe already work with, to go beyond the first names, the big names that come to your mind, to think more systemically and more strategically about who has an influence on your program. Who else that you haven't considered actually could play a really important role to achieve your objectives? So how to bring these in. So again, just to emphasize, not telling you how to do this, but just offering some advice and some tools that can help you deepen and have a more strategic view of how to do this. A lot of the materials shared are from UNDP's Effective Collaborative Action Guidance series, and we will be sharing these slides and the links to those resources after this meeting, probably next week sometime. So you will have access to all of these. Very broadly, again, this is a very standard sort of flow, but how could you go about deepening and reviewing your private sector engagement strategy? Of course, starting with what are you trying to do in your program? What are the objectives that you have to deliver on that? What are you currently doing that feels working really well that you want to strengthen, build on, but also identify where you feel you do have, or your program has got some weaknesses, are there any opportunities coming up, and so on. Very standard tool, a SWOT analysis, but it's worthwhile taking time as a team to just go through that, only focusing on your work with the private sector. What we're going to look at in more detail today is doing that systemic mapping of your universe of private sector actors. So really broadening your views of who you could be or should be working with to maybe identify new ones. And then also helping you prioritize, because you won't be able to work in the same way and deeply with all of them. So just offering some ideas for how you can prioritize and differentiate ways of engaging with different actors. For organizations such as UNDP, and maybe for some of those on the call today, you may also want to include a risk screening. So for UNDP, it's we have some certain criteria for who you can and cannot work with in terms of industries or in terms of high risk sectors. And then we'll also finish off today by looking a little bit more into developing engagement plans for your priority actors and action plans. It is a very short session that we have. Normally, we'll take maybe 1 or 2 days over a workshop to go through these in detail. So today is an introduction to some of these tools, which, as I said, we'll share to help guide your work. So that first step, as I said, you've reviewed where your objectives are. What are you trying to achieve? Where are you with your current program? Where else do you need to focus in on? So for private sector, with a SWOT analysis, this can be done in an hour. It can be done online with your colleagues chipping in, or you can take a couple of hours out with your partners to just jot down some ideas. Example questions here in looking at your strengths about what you feel you are currently doing well with private sector engagement. What is the expertise and value your program, your team is bringing to the private sector that you can think of as a strength? Opportunities coming up, such as external trends that are working to your advantage. For example, the EU no deforestation regulations coming out have been a real incentive to get some companies involved in sustainable production platforms in different countries. Which partners are you working with that you can build on and support? So many opportunities there that you can build on, but also a good moment to look at what has prevented you, or what is preventing, what are the challenges in engaging with the private sector in the way you feel you need to for your program. Are there any comparative disadvantages in how your organization or the FOLUR platform or whichever program you're involved in may be seen to have a comparative disadvantage that you need to overcome? Are there any threats that you also see in your particular context that you need to bear in mind as you are further developing and deepening your strategy? So it's a very simple, very old tool. Many of you will have used it before, but really taking time to use this, only thinking about private sector, can also be a helpful reset. So our first step, again, these are very standard steps that you will have hopefully employed already, especially those of you that have engaged with UNDP's effective collaboration action discovery episodes and series that the FACS community has had. But let's think about who is your universe, who is in the private sector universe. And by that, we want you to take time with your stakeholders to think about the broader range of actors that you can be working with. So beyond the names, as I said, that you may automatically think about. What you're trying to do is have that broader, more systemic view, identify new organizations, new companies, new finance institutions, producer groups, who is knowledgeable, who why would they want to be part of this, what might motivate them. You could do this by discussing it with your team members, obviously with some desk research, talking to some of your stakeholders if you have time to do a formal interview process with them. We do have, and I'll share it with you in a moment, a very basic Excel tool. You can obviously make your own, but if it helps, a nice Excel tool, you can start mapping all of these organizations down. And we found in previous experiences that you can maybe have a list of, say, 200, over 200 when you're looking at a national platform. So the list could be quite long. It's always helpful to keep that updated as well. Again, the key here is to think beyond the traditional and think about it a bit more systemically. Another point is, who is the private sector for you, for your organization, for your program? It is for UNDP, and our recommendation is always to think beyond the multinationals. Also think beyond some of the large domestic companies. You will probably think about traders and exporters. Sure, of course, they're absolutely key to note those down. Who else is in our universe, though? There'll be so many small, medium enterprises that are providing inputs to smallholders and other businesses working in the commodities that you're involved in, providing inputs, providing credit, transport services. Are there business associations such as chambers of commerce or other roundtables that could be a good network to engage and collaborate with in order to get input, get expertise, and share the information of the programs that you're working on? Social enterprises, finance institutions, and even some state-owned enterprises you could categorize as being private sector. In a way, they are also delivering a service. They are a key part of a market system that you are obviously involved in as well. So think a bit more broadly. There's a bit of a complicated slide, which I like in a way, because it helps to remind us that we are in a system that's not linear, that's not black and white. And there are many factors and many influences impacting on the commodity space that you are all working on. So think about this broader systemic view when you are considering your private sector universe. This is an example, again, very traditional, but slightly more expanded view of a value chain that a team in FOLUR, Peru developed to look at their palm oil universe. So apart from the traditional supply chain actors in the middle, also considering some of the services that we see in the bottom there really helped them identify actually new private sector actors that they knew were actually having a really big influence on the palm oil sector that they had not involved in before. And the example I like to give is they identified media companies, so the media sector, as being a type of private sector organization they wanted to work more closely with, because they were delivering messages to smallholder farmers through spots, through even some of the soap operas that were transmitted by radio, where you could be putting in messages around sustainable production, good agricultural practices that arrive at smallholders. So it's a very nice example of a private sector actor that wouldn't traditionally come to mind, but actually could end up being highly influential for that particular context. So the Excel sheet, not a very nice slide, but the Excel sheets that we'll share with you, or the one that you can develop, can help you just, again, note down that expanded view of the different categories of who in Ghana, in Madagascar, in Liberia, whichever country you're in now, who for the sector we're working in, what are the categories of private sector actors that we need to work with here? Are we engaging with them? What might be some examples of the companies, finance institutions, etc., that we know are around? So just start mapping them out. Again, this is an example from Peru, where in noting this down, the team are also using it as an opportunity to make notes around the different segments. So really good to start putting it down, to have that discussion with the team. So don't look at the detail. I'm just showing you the process that one team went through. And then using the tables as well to say for different sectors, do we need to further refine them? Who else? Do we need to work with transport institutions? Maybe not. Do we work with technical service providers? No, maybe that's not a priority for us now. So each one of these will spur quite good discussions. So you've gone through the big mapping, you've looked at categories. For each category, you've mapped out many names. You might have arrived at 200 different types of organizations, from finance institutions, input providers, traders, SMEs, etc. Each one of you will have different resources available. You may have a whole team dedicated to relationships, partnerships, private sector engagement. You may be on your own and have to do everything just by yourself. Depending on your resources and the priority of the private sector engagement, you will have to identify how and which ones you can engage with in a deeper way. So Again, these are not new. Many of you will have used these before, especially if you've been involved in developing advocacy strategies, for example. We have these tools listed in more detail in our private sector guidance that we'll share after this. But what we found, this kind of tool does help to prioritize and to think through all of those actors that we looked at before. Let's just think, who is more of a champion for what are we trying to do? Who has really high influence to bring about that change that you're trying to work on? And who has a high interest in that? So it's really good to start categorizing the different actors into these different groups. The key axes here are influence. So are they interested in what your, influence as in, do they have the power and resource to dedicate to the effort that you're involved in, to your program? Are they respected? How are they seen in the sector? Or do they have low influence because they have no resources? They're maybe a bit marginalized. And yeah, what is their interest in what it is that you're doing? What is their motivation and willingness to engage? And this is going to be very important to identify not only who is supportive, but also, and this is where maybe sometimes we forget to look, but who is skeptical or who's hostile or who is really putting barriers up to what you're trying to do, and how do we engage with them? Who is high influence and unsupportive because of that negative interest? So these categorizations can then be used to help determine your engagement strategy. So again, more detail in this in the guidance that we'll share. But for example, those that we identify as being unsupportive, so high influence with negative interest in what we're trying to do, are a major risk, especially because of that high influence. So how do you neutralize them to eliminate the threat? How do you work with them to try and shift them to be a little bit more towards maybe a reluctance, so to improve that interest that they have? But we can't ignore that segment. We do have to find ways of engaging with them. The reluctants and the supportives, so those who have a little bit more interest, again, a lot of people focus on these because you want to build them up into being a champion and helping to lead some of the work that you're doing as well. So how do we inspire those that have high influence but are still unsure about how interested they are? How do you help them shift by building their understanding of what it is that you're trying to do into being more of a champion? And again, those who are supportive, so really interested, really totally on board with what you're trying to do, but have low influence. How do you help build that agency that they have? How do you help build their capacity and give them more voice so they can also be champions? So that's a helpful tool to then also help prioritize of all of those actors that you had before. Where do we put them and how do we select which ones we need to work with? The majority of your private sector stakeholders will probably be in that big marginal box. So they may be interested, they have some idea, or maybe they're marginal. Still worth engaging with them, just in a maybe low effort way, such as sending out a newsletter, etc. But always good to keep some links with them as well. Again, I don't need to look at the name, it's in Spanish anyway, but just to give you a vision of how the Peru palm oil team got their long list. And as I just mentioned, the majority of them were in the marginal group. There was one group that they felt are a challenge that they needed to work more closely with, only a couple of champions, and the rest were in the other group. So it really helped the team there kind of differentiate between all of that long list that they had, and then from this list choose 2 or 3 from each of the reluctant and supporting categories and the champions. So we've got we've looked at our long list. We've used categorization to try and start refining it a little bit. And now you can start thinking about developing an engagement plan. The value of doing this is that you start thinking very strategically about the individual private sector actor. It could be a finance institution you've identified as being a champion, but you haven't engaged with them before and you really need to deepen that with them. It could be one of the reluctance. It's a big input provider that's absolutely essential to delivering good inputs for the good agricultural practice or regen ag program that you're thinking of. But yeah, you haven't engaged with them before. You will not work with them in the same way. So again, taking some time to think about that individual company, producer group, SME, trader in a differentiated way will help you be more effective with how you work with them. So lots of information available now online through your networks in country and in the landscape. What is that particular organization's vision and view and work related to what you're working on? Do they have sustainability commitments and policies you can use as a hook or as an incentive to get them more involved in what you're trying to do? What programs do they have in place that you can bring into your work as good examples or as examples of work that could be scaled up? But really what you're trying to understand is how you can find the incentives to bring them into the work that you're trying to do. There's also, as I have said before, different types of engagement, and I think it does benefit you to think how to do this in a better way. So with many of your stakeholders, for example, the big group of marginals, you can just keep them informed. That should be the absolute basics. So you can have a newsletter or an update that you share. What is happening in your platform, in the program that you have going on? Just this is what has been happening the last few months, the last year, and so on. So it is just one way. You're just sending out some information about what's happening. You can then consult with them. So, just what is your opinion on this? Thank you. That's a good input. But ultimately, somebody else is deciding on the action plans, the roadmaps. This is just a consultation to get inputs and views. But as we know, many private sector actors, especially some of the companies, really are looking for opportunities to be more deeply involved. So opportunities for them to not only be consulted, which is more of an extractive process, but actually feel they are contributing. They are part of developing shared analysis. They're part of collaborating to design the solutions, to develop the roadmaps, and ultimately being able to co-create a shared vision, having shared decision-making, resource plans, and so on. So thinking through, when we say engagement, it's not just one way of doing it. There are many different ways, again, depending on the actors and what you feel you need them to do. Another very basic little sheet, but we have used this, and many teams have used this, to just jot down a few bullet points for each company or finance institution, just very briefly. What did I learn about them? What did we feel they are? They're reluctant, supportive. What do I need to, what do we as a team, what do we want to, what is the ask? What is the objective of engaging with that organization? And then how are we going to do it? Which you can then review every few months. So this was a helpful, again, very short, very basic tool, but helpful prompt for teams, and especially those tasked with managing private sector relationships to help focus the attentions. So many of these tools we will, as I said, be sharing with you. With previous Jeff funding, and one of the key resources for the FOLUR program has been the Value Beyond Value Chains toolkit, We have in the past done presentations on this toolkit. Alejandra, I think we may be able to share the links of previous recordings with the group. This is a really useful toolbox, really, that was developed a few years ago, specifically to help teams and their partners in presenting the business case to businesses and private sector on how and why to engage in landscape initiatives, or even national level platforms, and so on, with a really good set of case studies showing why collaboration between private sector, government, other stakeholders is necessary and has proved to be really valuable. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into that today, but there are slides that you can use and adapt showing that case study, graphics, and so on. And again, some of the tools that we've just showed with some of the steps that you can take for your private sector universe mapping and prioritization. So these will be shared after. I'm just going to stop sharing just to also catch up a little bit with the chat and see if there's any questions, because unfortunately I couldn't look at that when I was doing. I don't see any questions there. Is Mulugeta, has he joined, Alejandra? No, I don't think so. Mulugeta, are you with us? No. Okay.
No, I'm afraid not, sadly.
It's okay. I know that he was on a field trip, so he wasn't sure if he'd get back in time. But before we go into the Ethiopia case study, I'm just going to open the floor just to any reflections, thoughts, questions. That you've got quite a few of you now joining. So yeah, please share your experience of working with the private sector or any reflections on what we've been talking about today. Or if you want, yes, Michael, please go ahead.
Thank you, Christiana. I want to break the ice.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you very much for the insightful presentation. Very often, the challenge that we have as a government institution dealing with private sector, engaging with the private sector, is when we have conflicting interests. Most of the private sector thrives on advocacy and to be able to raise funds to do their job. And the funding agency, the agency that fund this private sector, especially CSOs and NGOs, have their own agenda and tend to influence the work that they do. And sometimes when the agenda is contrary to what the government organization wants, you see them to be very influential, but your engagement with them tend to be marred by the fact that the agenda is quite different. Sometimes you share some sensitive information with them, they misuse the information. It discourages you from engaging further, even though they are very influential in the work that you do and the sector that you find yourself. I want your thoughts on some of these in terms of how to manage such circumstances or situations. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Michael. Some great points in that. And I'm thinking there's a couple of things that we can also share afterwards. So colleagues working in the Effective Collaboration for Action team are looking into exactly that issue of power. So the issue of power and trust comes up quite a lot when you have the private sector in the room in many of these collaborative spaces. So I know they have separate guidance and tools on how to work with that. So I can definitely make sure we can share some of those with you. I think a reflection I wanted to share with you to answer a little bit one of your questions is we did a review, I did a review last year of some of UNDP's work with the private sector and government in Peru and Indonesia. And in talking to a wide range of private sector actors, for those contexts and those commodity spaces specifically, some of the words that really stood out for me was efficiency. So the companies, say in this case, traders, processors, exporters, find that what's helpful for them in working more closely with government, especially government, but also other actors, is that ability to scale good practice, is that ability to be more efficient with investments. With some of the big challenges that are being faced at the moment, traceability systems for EUDR, for example, no one company can, many companies have their own systems in place, admittedly, but they all are saying having and being part of developing a national system would be much more efficient use of resources for us. So it's trying to find the language that will bring them in, which is separate to the point you raised around trust and power and how to deal with information. But in terms of bringing them into this common vision, being able to establish common objectives, it's having to find language that resonates more with some parties. And I know for the private sector, it is about scaling up, it is about efficiency of resource, it is about commonly identifying these challenges and all parties recognizing that different actors have a role to play. So yeah, it's thank you for bringing that to the group, Michael. Thank you, Helen, for I'm glad you like the framework. I know many teams that we worked with, and we'll hear from the Ethiopia team in a minute, they found it super useful. So simple, but really quite effective to share that. Michael, you broke the ice, but I don't see any other questions at the moment. Oh, Hazina. Yes, Michael, please go ahead while I read the question in the chat.
Okay. Thank you so much. The other thing that I found when you brought about the traceability system, I noticed we also had some challenges where, in our country, the private sector already had a private traceability system. And these were impact investments. And they were making some commercial returns on these investments. But it didn't cover all farmers. They were using it for certification purposes. So when EUDR came on board and has all cocoa must meet the requirements, and Ghana decided to do a national system, we had a pushback from the private sector. Not because the national system wasn't good, but because it's going to take their investment. Some of them just made investment not too long ago. The returns for them, they can't recoup their investment, so there was a pushback. And to be able to get their buy-in, we allow them to use their system for a period of time and told them that don't reinvest in the system. Start integrating your system into our system. Start reconciling your data with our data, but you are free to use it for like two years. And we interconnected their system to our system for 2 years to give them time to be able to recover the investment and to stop further investment. And that worked perfectly. We got the buy-in the long run. That's what I wanted to share.
Michael, that's a fantastic case study that would be great to capture, because I think within that, I sort of heard, that compromise from both sides, trying to, you didn't just push back and say, no, you can't use your system. It's like, okay, you've invested in it, you have your 2 years grace, but let's work together to streamline everything into the one system. And they agreed to that. So I think you've just outlined a really great example of collaborating well, understanding each other's incentives. Flexibility, Charles, is key, yes. And I think that hearing each other and being able to have that common vision, I think obviously really played a role here very much. I just want to make sure we hear from the Ethiopia team. So please keep putting any reflections and questions in the chat for everybody else to hear as well. But Alejandro, if we could, so Mulugeta will introduce himself. He's the program manager from FOLUR Ethiopia. The program there is focusing on forest products. Coffee is the main one, as you would expect from Ethiopia. And we had a workshop together last year to go through some of these tools. So in his words, this is how they went about the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. I'll be sharing now. Please let me know if you can hear it.
It's a pleasure to to talk to and to be part of this discussion, and particularly with Asian colleagues in remote settings. My name is Mulgeita Worko. I work for the Ministry of Planning and Development in Ethiopia as a FOLUR Ethiopia project manager. And that said about me, and I think FOLUR as a global program is already introduced at the onset by Greta, and thank you for that. So I don't want to take much of your time about talking of the FOLUR program. However, I would like to spend 1 minute about the intervention components, first of all, and like to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes, thank you, Mulugeta.
Thank you.
Maybe put it into presentation mode if you could. That might be easier.
Yes.
Okay. Great.
Okay. Is that visible now?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, yes.
Great. So in Ethiopia, the FOLUR is called Preventing Forest Loss, Promoting Restoration and Integrating Sustainability in Ethiopia's Coffee Value Chains and Food Systems. A very long title. Sorry for that. And is part of the global program. I don't want to talk about it. And I don't want to talk about the problems as well, because most of you know it very well. And we implement in 22 districts in big 4 regions that's known to be coffee producing regions of Ethiopia, known for moist Afro-montane forest ecosystems. In that said, I would like to spend 1 minute about the components. These are the areas where we are working: integrated land use planning and management systems. We also promote sustainable food production with a focus on coffee value chain. And we integrate both conservation and restoration of natural forest ecosystems through participatory forest management approach, particularly for the conservation part. And we have a cross-cutting function, which is knowledge management and M&E. And to speak few points about what we have learned and applied from private sector engagement. Before that, I would like to thank Christina and Greta for taking the initiative to provide a very intensive training in 2 rounds, one in virtual session like this one and the other in person. And I would like to share with you about what we learned from that private sector training. In the first place, I'm sorry for the point 3. It should have been point number 1. And it is about structured and comprehensive understanding of private sector engagement. A lot has been said about private sector engagement here and there. However, we rarely understand what it exactly is and how we make sure that private sector is actually engaged, and what are actually the indicators of private sector engagement and how we measure impact of that engagement as well. So I think in order to arrive at that stage at maturity, first of all, we need to understand what actually private sector engagement actually is in terms of conceptual framework and in terms of the methodological aspects as well. So that training provided us a very good foundation for the Ethiopian team to understand what private sector engagement actually refers to and what its components are. And the second lesson was about stakeholder universe, how we think in terms of the different categories of stakeholders across scales and contexts. Particularly, these stakeholders differ across geographical scales, and they are varied, and you cannot categorize in one box. So we need to understand how these stakeholders actually vary in a bigger geographical scale. And also, what does that mean to the Ethiopian context, for example. So they might be different in when it comes to Ethiopia, depending on their engagement, the scale of operation, level of investment that they are investing in, and then the kind of things. So it gave us a broader framework to think about that stakeholder universe so that we can identify them and categorize them and prioritize them depending on the methodology that the trainers provided us, based on the influence, interest grade, uh, uh, and those kind of prioritization metrics. And another interesting point that we have taken is what does actually private sector engagement plan means as part of actually the comprehensive understanding. We really acquired very interesting insight about the key components of private sector engagement plan and the steps that we need to follow to make sure that that private sector engagement plan is robust. And when we are planning, we should not be, optimistic about achieving something very ambitious at the early stage of private sector engagement. So we need to think in terms of phased approach to arrive at a mature stage. It must start from like identification or orientation, awareness, and a kind of joint engagement and then those things. And crafting strategies based on what the private sector actually does, what their interests are, what their influence and those things. And so far, these are the key lessons that we have drawn from the training and what we practically done after the training. So I think it's not training per se that's important. Actually, it is important because it gave us some conceptual and methodological frameworks. However, that needs to be translated into practical action. So I would like to take a couple of minutes to speak about what we did. We have started to develop a stakeholder engagement plan in team settings. And these were after identification of stakeholders with a focus on the coffee sector actually, because we had problems. We have identified that we had problems in terms of having a good database or a good profile of the private sector in the forestry sector, and that activity is still pending, which we are looking forward to make sure that the forestry sector has a private sector engagement database or stakeholder universe. We developed for the core because we have identified the different stakeholders as Christina shared to us earlier. And based on that stakeholder universe, we categorized and prioritized them, and we developed a stakeholder engagement plan. And that's one action that we did. And that engagement plan actually has sets of logically interconnected actions, one coming after the other. And the second important action that we did is practical engagement of the private sector in National Coffee Platform. Christina was talking about the continuum of private sector engagement, which is analogous to what you call a continuum of participation from passive participation to proactive participation. And in here in the private sector engagement, we have a low-level information provision to a kind of co-creation role. Now we have engaged to the highest two levels of engagement, like the collaboration, and the co-creation stage, I can say, because we have brought the private sector, both international and national companies, into the national stakeholder platform, not simply merely members, but now they are members of the platform's board or the steering committee, so that they are now decision makers. So one form of practical engagement is allowing the private sector to also engage in decision-making processes. which makes sense for realistic action and the other thing we did is training in quality coffee production and marketing to range of private sector stakeholders. One is we have brought both coffee exporters, processors, and producer organizations, cooperatives and unions, to a common platform and created an environment where they can communicate each other and expressing their expectations. What are the processors expected to do to maintain coffee quality, what the exporters should do, and what the producers should do so that the coffee value chain works efficiently in market chain. So we have made rounds of trainings at subnational levels, and I think these are the key things that we have been doing so far. And we have lots of actions that we are now drafting, particularly in establishing or strengthening private sector actors at the community level, particularly creating women-based business groups and advancing them to be entrepreneurs, like engaging them in input supply, and medium enterprise, like, for example, small ruminant marketing, coffee nursery establishment, apiculture, and those things. And now we are, because we're supporting them and we are trying to make sure that they have a robust business plan, a market analysis, and having good enough financial resources, linking them with financial service providers, and be able to invest in medium level enterprises, although not big ones. And this is what we are practically making. And we have completed the legalization and starter capital formation as well. So these are the things that we have done so far as private sector engagement is concerned.
I was just going to say thank you, Mulugeta, but he's not on the call. That was the session we had yesterday with colleagues from Asia. But again, a good example, I hope, of some of the work that we did together with the FOLUR Ethiopia team. Those tools that I shared earlier, very simple, but really effective to use together with partners, with colleagues. And for me, it was really interesting to see, for example, with the coffee value chain that the team were looking at, they hadn't previously considered local supermarkets. So of course, coffee is important in Ethiopia, but there's a whole other group of private sector actors they hadn't engaged with that they felt could be important to bring into some of the work that they were doing. And the one I really liked in the forestry value chains, they were looking at non-timber forest products such as honey and trying to look at those value chains until, as a team, they suddenly realized a really big actor here is the building and construction and infrastructure divisions who use timber for the electrification programs for building, and they'd never engaged with them. So just even having these discussions can throw up other sectors that you know are ones that are really influential for what you're trying to do. So as I said, that was just some quick examples there. In an hour, it's going to be very hard to go through this in detail. As we've heard from some colleagues on the call, some really big questions around how and who do you engage with in terms of the ethics, power imbalances, dynamics, really getting them engaged. So this is a simple first step. But yes, appreciate that you are all with us today. Thank you, Sylvia, for your points as well. FAO, another organization working very much with private sector. So please do keep sharing experiences in the FACTS community private sector group. It is there to share some of this with colleagues as well. And we'll share links to those in the chat. So just a minute or two before we leave, I'll just throw open the floor again to any other reflections, or if you'd like to share with the group a great experience or a lesson learned from your work with the private sector. Michael broke the ice last time. Who's going to break the ice this time? But it's okay. Thank you, Susie, for your comment as well. Would you like to share that with the group?
No, I just find that a very interesting insight, that the decision to actually include, one thing is to be involved and be included in as a participant, but actually being involved in decision making is really a big step forward, or big step in that engagement. Interesting.
Yeah, and in that, thank you, and to sort of echo that, in the review that we had last year, and taking the time to speak to some of the cocoa, coffee, and palm companies that we did last year, they really value being included and feel they are the link to market. And most of all the commodities that we work with in one way or another are linked to market, and who knows the market better than the private sector? So bringing in that experience, we know it's not always positive, but at least we help, they help us understand how it works, and being part of shaping that would be great. Thank you, Mina, for sharing some tools there in the chat as well. If you'd like to, we'll take a moment to have a look at those. We'll also put those in the resources after this call. So unless there's any other comments, please, Alejandra, if we leave the room open just for a couple of minutes, and if people want to add a few more links in the chat, they can do. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining us today. Hope it was useful. And we look forward to seeing you all again in another session soon. Thank you very much. And yes, Helen, we will be sharing the PowerPoints and the tools.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Christina.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Christina, you're muted at the moment, I think.
Yeah, see you next time.
See you next time. Thank you. Thanks, Alejandra. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, now it's just us. I think it was a success.
Yes. Oh, good. I'm glad we did that recording. That worked really well.
I was dreading myself because at the first, when you were talking, like I had like 3 times, this thing pop up, like you have unstable connection. I was like, oh God, no. I was like, no, not during the recording, please. But it worked. That's good. That's good.
Yeah, good for
And everyone
future as
seemed very
well.
interested.
Yeah, I thought it was so nice. Some good questions. It's always a bit like, oh, if nobody asks anything. But I think yesterday and today, you just need 1 or 2 people to have some, kind
Like
of
break
thoughts.
the ice situation.
Yeah. So, and there were really big questions as well. It's like, oh my God, like we're going from really basic tools to like these really big questions. So anyway, that was brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for your help.
Thank you, Christina.
So I'll get some of those tools, and then I think in the mail you'll do it anyway. But I know you said the private sector group isn't engaged, but hopefully if there has been interest, it's like, well, it's your forum, use it or lose it. So I can add a link to that as well.
No, definitely. And I've noted that I will be sharing the previous sessions recordings as well, as you've mentioned today in the call. Because those are only the value beyond the chains, was it from last year? You're referring to those, right? Okay.
There's quite a few, because I think for law last year we did, it seemed like 1 million, but we did like quite a few value beyond value chains sessions, like 3, I think. because it also included finance institutions.
Mhm.
So maybe just put links to them also in the private sector group. But if we have like a link also to the trust, I don't know if the ECA team have done any on trust and power.
I have no clue, actually.
No, I don't know. Well, I'll email them and see if there's anything I want to share, because it has come up before. So
I'll just ask you to, like, when you share the document with me, like, also share which sessions you would like the recording of, so I'm certain.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah.
So thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
It was
Great.
good.
Thank you.
Very
Yeah,
good
let me know
talking.
what the feedback is, just so we can keep improving.
Definitely.
All right.
Definitely.
Thank you. Ciao,
Okay.
ciao.
Ciao.
Bye.